A Hermit in the Himalayas by Brunton. Chapter 10. I watch the winding trail of rock ledge cut along the mountainside until the late afternoon light reveals a tall, orange-robed figure turning a hairpin bend and moving quickly in my direction. I await him patiently upon the veranda of my bungalow, for it is the figure of an expected visitor. 2 days ago, a letter came from him, bringing with it the pleasant and surprising announcement that he would divert his route and spend a few days with me. His name is Yogi Pranavananda. He is also the man with whom I had planned to go to Tibet on pilgrimage to Mount Kailas. He had been very disappointed at my failure to obtain governmental permission for my journey. When he realized that the government's refusal was final, he decided to make the journey alone. For him, entry was free and unbarred, because the Tibetans permit Hindu holy men to visit Kailas as pilgrims, although they are not allowed to stay there for any length of time. He crosses the stony patch of ground upon which the bungalow has been built, and we look at one another. I raise my upturned palms and close them in salutation, bowing slightly. He does the same. His stature is commanding, his eyes large and gleaming, his face heavily bearded. His hair hangs in long, thick waves down to his shoulders. He is well wrapped in several folds of long, thick, orange-dyed robes over which he wears a loose, fawn-colored, waterproof coat. The yogi takes a proffered seat. His grave face looks very impressive. We talk for 2 hours and then retire for meditation. After that, I have my supper. Pranavananda eats no evening meal, but drinks some goat milk and takes a little fruit. We sit up late, for there is much we have to discuss. My companion loves Mount Kailas and Lake Manasrowar. Manasrowar. A photograph which he once took of that sacred region has hung in my room since my arrival. He has been there twice. First in 1928, when he took the western and the longest route from Kashmir and through Gartok, and then back to Kashmir, and again in 1935, when he took the southern, shortest, safest, and least troublesome route from Almora. After his visit to me, he will return to British India and set again for Almora, whence he will proceed to Kailas for a time. But on this occasion he will not merely go as a visitor, but pass a whole year as a resident of a Buddhist monastery, most probably the great monastery of Truphoklo, Truphuklo, also called Jared Tuphok. Tuthok and Santalsvo. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm really mispronouncing these names. I really must apologize. There he will pass his time in meditation and study. He will be the only Hindu yogi living in Western Tibet, and the Tibetans have given him this permission because they hold him in such great regard. I realize ruefully that amongst my paper is a heavily sealed envelope addressed to the head lama of Truphoklo Monastery, containing a letter requesting him to permit me to reside there, pursue my studies and meditations. This letter of introduction was written by a Tibetan officer, for the monastery lies on the southern bank of Lake Manasrovar, and therefore under benign gaze of Mount Kailas. But now, alas, the beautiful, rhythmic, flourishing Tibetan characters of the handwriting on the envelope will remain unread by Lamaist eyes. Pranavananda will be cut off from any direct communication with India for nearly 2/3 of the year, for the heavy autumn snows will close the passes over the Himalayas and isolate western Tibet. I express some concern as to how he will bear the terrible cold, because he has never before had to endure the Tibetan winter, and he seems quite confident and optimistic. Before we retire to sleep, we both gaze at the photograph, which hangs unframed against the buff, distempered wall. Kailas sheathed in a white rime of frozen snow and ice. His eyes are filled with deep admiration and reverence. There is no doubt that Kailas means more to him than any other place on earth, more even than his own native land. I have found contentment through my life of world renunciation and yoga practice, he murmurs as he strokes his flowing beard. I am never unhappy. Yet, once I felt a deep sadness, and I had depression, a melancholy that I have never known since. I gave up worldly life 13 years ago, and that occasion was when I had to leave the Kailas region last year and return to India before the route over the Himalayas became snowbound and impassable, and suffered its icy climate, its scarcity of food and fuel, and the land even had the most primitive comforts. But of all these privations, meant nothing to me and did not disturb my mind. It was only the agonizing parting from this wonderful place which had the power to cloud over feelings and distress my soul. O Kailas is most bewitching in its beauty, and its beauty is overpowering, and from a spiritual point of view it possesses a subtle magnetic vibration of a supremely high order. Quote, I have been on pilgrimage to most of India's holy places, but none of them has had the high spiritual vibration that I have found around this Tibetan peak and lake. Local legends say that the Buddhas still dwell in their invisible, subtle bodies upon its gorgeous silvery summit, and I can well believe it, and I do not know a more fascinating or more inspiring scene than sunset upon the bluish-green waters of Manasrovar. It looks like a huge emerald set between two majestic mountains, Kailas on the north and Gurla Mandhartha on the south. The resplendent rays of the waning sun add a mystic charm to a lake which is already mysteriously charming in itself. The spiritual vibrations emanating from it enrapture me and lull the mind into sublime serenity. Often it has transported me into involuntary ecstasies. The best type of Buddhist monks in Tibet are to be found in the monasteries around these holy shores, and several among them strive day and night to attain the eternal silence of nirvana. Could you have come with me this time, it would have made me happier still. But we must accept destiny. Perhaps next year it will relent and the permit will be granted to you. Then I shall return to India, and if you are free, we shall go together." End quote. He touches his palms in salutation and is gone for the night. Next day, we wander into the forest and move along happily under the spreading branches of the somber firs, treading a yielding carpet of decaying fir needles. A few wild Himalayan primroses with their serrated petals give some occasional brighter color. A sudden gust of wind sweeps across the valleys, and the trees wave their dark green arms above the ground. Each of these firs looks like a giant Christmas tree. Perhaps this forest is the elusive home of Santa Claus. Perhaps I shall come face to face with him here one day. I shall dearly love to meet the white-bearded old gentleman and ask him a few questions, for he haunted my childhood days and gave rise to visions of his great bag of gifts that, alas, never materialized. We find a clean, shady spot and sit down. How wonderfully restful for the eyes to be out of the glaring yellow light of the plains. We chat and chat. Soon we turn to our favorite theme, and the yogi becomes autobiographical. I induce him to recount the story of his first visit to Kailas. Pranavananda strokes his thick black beard in reflective silence and then finds voice. 8 years have passed since I set out with a companion, a brother disciple. Our teacher, the holy Swami Janananda, had already gone on pilgrimage to Kailas, and his vivid descriptions of the journey and its goal whetted our own appetites and influenced us to undertake this difficult and dangerous journey. We traveled first to the state of Kashmir, and in the city of Srinagar, we collected some clothing and equipment for life in Tibet, that land of Arctic snows. Then we moved across the lovely valley of Kashmir and over the mountain ridges that enclose it, following the Sind River, S-I-N-D River, to Kargil and hence the town of Leh, L-E-H. The road led us across the famous Zojila Pass, Z-O-J-I-L-A, P-A-S-S, the approach to which, being a dangerously slippery, narrow ledge cut in the rock and curving around the corners of the mountainsides, we had to cross snow bridges and snow beds. At times, the way was very steep and even treacherous, for avalanches slip and fall on the path, sweeping to death those who are unfortunate enough to be in the way. These avalanches leave the path covered with slippery ice, and at some places we had to jump over crevices. Near Lamayura, the trail descended into what is said to be the world's deepest gorge. Its bottom is lost in gloom. We reached Leh after some time, and there visited a Buddhist monastery, where we saw an immense statue of the Maitreya, the Messiah of the Buddhists, who will appear to save the world in 2,000 years, according to their belief. Although it was a seated figure, it was so tall that its shoulders passed through the ceiling, its head being in another story of the building. Leh, L-E-H, is an interesting little town, for it stands at the junction of 4 great caravan roads. One leads to Central Asia and Yarkand, Y-A-R-K-A-N-D. Another to Tibet and China, and the others lead by different routes to India. We were in Ladakh, L-A-D-A-K-H, or Little Tibet. This country was once part of Tibet proper, but was invaded and conquered by the Kashmiris in the middle of the last century. It is therefore still a province of Kashmir, but it retains all its Tibetan characteristics. We pushed on in a southeasterly direction until we came to Hemis, Hemis, where we found the largest monastery of Lakdak. It is famous for its devil dances. In these dances, a group of lamas wear large and frightful masks over their heads, each colored to represent a devil or some terrifying horned beast of another world. They dance with twinkling bells on their feet. The monastery itself is built on the face of a gray cliff in a narrow ravine, but the head lama has a solitary and special seat for meditation placed on a distant rock high above the building. No sooner were we across the Tibetan frontier than we began to suffer from the cold, although it was still a good season of the year. Freezing, icy winds blew over us from the glaciers. Our hands and ears became benumbed. We found ourselves unable to hold the reins of our horses. It was only after some days that we were able to accomplish this feat. We tried to warm our hands over a fire of burning shrubs, but by the time one side got warm, the other side was again frozen. You may imagine our sufferings, for we were Hindus, accustomed to terrific heat. I, being born in the south at Rajamundry and educated in a college at Lahore, Lahore, both places being among the hottest in India, I was curious to know how the temperatures of Tibet compared with those of India, and so I took a thermometer with me on this journey. I found that the average figure between the frontier and Kailas was not far from the freezing point. However, we persisted with our adventure, for to us it was a holy pilgrimage, and once begun it was not to be given up except through death. We had great difficulties on the way, owing to our ignorance of the language. Sometimes we could not obtain change of horses, and we had to walk over the icy ground. At other times, the difficulty was in procuring food of any sort. In many of the villages, we found that the people did not and could not take a bath even once a year, so cold was it. At the trading mark of Gynaemina, Gynamina, a guide we had engaged deserted us on hearing news of a big caravan of merchants which had been attacked and robbed by bandits of all its goods and personal belongings, down to the very clothes of the unfortunate traders. Armed bandits are fairly common in western Tibet and make traveling unsafe. The robbery had occurred upon the road which we were due to take. Without a guide we could not proceed. However, God did not fail to protect us. A merchant turned up later who befriended us with food and lent us his own personal servant as a guide. Yet, no sooner was that trouble at an end when further distress awaited us. False rumors were spread throughout the place that we were two spies in the service of the British, and that the robes of the holy men which we wore were merely a disguise. The Tibetans held us up, watched us closely, and spied upon us in the effort to discover our supposed true identity. Thenceforth I had to hide my camera, which I carried and only used in secret. Somehow we managed to refute their suspicions sufficiently, at any rate, to enable us to get away. One Tibetan habit which I tried to acquire but failed was that of tea drinking. The tea is boiled for an hour and mixed with rancid butter and salt. The first time I drank it I became ill, only half an hour later. A curious fact was that the prickly shrubs, which in many places were the only fuel we could find, burned quite well, although they were fresh and green, as well as if they had been old and dry. At Darshan, Darchen, we met with a hospitable Tibetan householder who lived with his family in a single tent. He offered us shelter and food for a few days. When I awoke the first morning at about dawn, I noticed his younger daughter, who was only about 3.5 years old, who had slept through the terrible cold of nighttime when the temperature had sunk 10 degrees below freezing point, with only a single skin covering her half-clothed form. As soon as the little child saw that I was awake, she leapt like an arrow from her bed upon the floor and flew outside the door of the tent. There she buried herself upon a pile of snow that lay upon the ground, and lay almost prone upon it. At the time, she watched me closely. After a while, she returned to her bed and covered herself with a skin blanket once more, until I made a movement as if to rise and get up from my own bed. At once she flew outside the tent and flung herself upon the snow pile for the second time. I could not understand the reason for her curious behavior, and through my guide I made inquiries of the parent. He told me that snow falls heavily during the night and buries his dog, which sleeps outside in order to guard the tent. Only the animal's nose and eyes are left uncovered. The dog does not attempt to move all night, because that would cause its sleeping place to become wet, so it remains quiet under its snow blanket until daytime. These Tibetan dogs are large and ferocious mastiffs, and so powerful that they tear men to pieces like wolves. He explained that the little girl realized that my life would be in danger should I attempt to go outside the tent on arising, for the dog would treat me as a stranger, to be attacked. Hence, she had watched me since the first break of dawn, and at the first signs of movement had left out to hold the dog, which lay hidden beneath the snow, which I could not have seen, and thus prevent any injury to me. She could not speak and explain the danger because she did not know my language. I marveled at the wisdom and the goodness of this mite of a child, and I regarded this as being inherited because her father was a highly spiritual man. He had begged me to give him some lessons in the art of pranayama, which is breath controlled, used as a means of concentrating the mind. And I taught him some of our Hindu methods. In the ancient monastery of Siling, Silling, we found 108 monks, whose ages ranged from as young as 7 up to graybeards of over 70. It possessed a primitive printing press, which was worked by an old lama. Instead of using movable types, he engraved the whole page upon wooden blocks. In this way, each book was slowly and laboriously produced. A boy lama was working as his apprentice to succeed the old man when he died. The finished books were well made and exceedingly attractive. They were printed on Lhasa-made paper of 3 qualities: common, superior, and royal superfine. The books produced in the last edition had very thick, strong paper, and all the letters were printed in gold. When we were nearing Taklakot, Taklakot, we were overtaken by night and lost our way in the darkness. As we wandered helplessly, a stalwart Tibetan rushed at us with a large dagger in his hand. He knocked my fellow disciple to the ground and then thrust the edge of his dagger against my neck, shouting at the same time, "Who are you?" I answered gravely, feeling my last moment had come. "We are poor sadhus," which means holy, Hindu holy men. "We do not fear your dagger or your threats." Thereupon the attacker burst into peals of roaring laughter. When he calmed down, he said he would not hurt us. He explained, He explained that meeting us unexpectedly, he decided to play a practical joke on us. Tibetan sense of humor is quite peculiar. At the foot of the mountain, 6 miles from Lake Manasrawa, we reached the beautiful monastery of Punri, Punri. The walls were painted white, and the tops were decorated with brilliant red borders. We slept there for the night, and in the morning a young lama conducted us to the library. Every monastery in Tibet possesses its own ancient Sanskrit library. Books are sometimes included. Brought there more than 1,000 years ago by Buddhist monks fleeing from persecution in India. In the Punri library, there were magnificent images of sacred Buddhist personages placed on raised platforms amongst the old books. Many valuable paintings done in Chinese style upon the silken scrolls hung upon the walls. Our guide led us to a recess in the walls, which was heavily curtained upon both sides and sheltered by a gorgeous silken canopy. As all the windows of the library hall were hung with silk veilings, there was only a dim light in the place, except for 2 tiny butter-fed lamps which burned before this recess, and it took a minute or two to realize that a figure placed upon the raised platform inside the recess was not a mere statue like the other figures, but a living man, and quite a young man. In fact, we were told that he was only 16 years old, and he was the head lama or abbot of the entire monastery, highly honored by both senior and junior monks, and deeply respected by the common folk. As you know, the Grand Lama of Tibet, as well as the head lamas of the important monasteries, are selected by councils who search for the reincarnation of the deceased lama. They are found as infants and then carefully educated for their high office. In the case of this young abbot of Punri Monastery, he had had a number of articles belonging to the dead abbot placed before him by the council. They were well mixed with other objects purposely added. Without hesitation, he recognized and picked out correctly all those things which belonged to the departed and rejected the others. He sat absolutely motionless before us, with his right foot placed upon his left thigh, and his left foot placed upon his right thigh. One hand was placed upon the right knee, but the other lay flat in his lap, with the palm turned upward and the thumb raised. I was highly impressed by his looks. He had an intelligent and serene face, a light ivory-colored complexion, and a mild, compassionate expression. Really, he looked like a young, living Buddha. I quickly feel the spiritual atmosphere around any person. In his presence, I experienced such a sense of reverence that I felt constrained to prostrate myself before him in profound respect, an act I had not hitherto done in Tibet because among the hosts of monks and lamas I had not yet met one who deserved the veneration which I give only to my own personal teacher. The head lama acknowledged the devotion shown him by making his first movement and stretching out his right hand to touch my bowed head in blessing. After that, he took a richly engraved brass plate from his side and gave me a handful of dried apricots, a gesture which carried the same sacred significance as in India. I left feeling greatly exalted, for he was the most spiritually powerful, the most Buddha-like of all the lamas I met in Tibet. At last, after all our sufferings, from the unbelievable cold and adventures in the strange country, weak and hungry and benumbed, we reached Lake Manasrawa. My shoes had been worn out on the rocky trails, and I walked with blistered feet along the snowy paths. My long-felt yearnings for the sight of the holy, hill-bordered lake were satisfied. It was evening when we arrived, and we were put up in a small gompa, Gompa, or monastic heritage, situated on a pyramidal hill. At 10 o'clock at night, I opened the window next to my bed and looked out. I was fortunate, for a full moon lit up the whole lake. A cold wind was blowing, and the surface of the dark blue waters was broken up into high waves. The moonbeams glittered upon the waves, but the middle of the lake was calm, reflecting both the stars and the moon. Red-beaked, white swans glided over the surface. The water dashed against the white, treeless, sandy shore, producing a pleasant and melodious sound at rhythmic intervals. Then a cluster of thick black clouds appeared and threw shadows over Manaswarwa. Such was the spiritual vibration in the atmosphere that my heart leapt with joy. The mind unconsciously shook off all other thoughts and slowly but steadily attained one-pointedness. My consciousness plunged into a mystic lake of bliss. My happiness was indescribable. The last stage of my journey brought me to Mount Kailas, famous throughout Asia. My first view of it was a white-wrapped dome standing between two other peaks that almost touched its sides. The ice which covered it shone like polished silver. That is why we Hindus call it the Silver Mountain. Our Puranas, which are sacred books, Puranas, our Puranas say that the god Shiva lives in meditation posture upon its white summit, while the Tibetans believe Buddha to be there. Of course, I do not believe that he is there in his physical body, but I do believe that his spiritual presence is there. The vibrations are unique and surround the mountain with an invisible field of enrapturing divinity, as a magnet is surrounded by an invisible field of magnetism. And it is because the atmosphere causes one to become involuntarily meditative that it is superior to any other atmosphere I know. That is why I am now going to spend a year in one of the Buddhist monasteries of that region. I make the traditional 30-mile walk around Kailas and the 50-mile walk around Manasrovar, pacing slowly and with my mind intent on holy things. My pilgrimage was at an end. I will not weary you with the details of my return journey to Kashmir. Excuse me. I returned safely, and 7 years later repeated my visit to Kailas, but took the much shorter route from Almora, which I intend to take again. The Yogi's story is finished. We return home through the forest in silence and move with slow, deliberate steps. During the few days of his visit, he gives me sundry little glimpses of Tibetan life. In Ladakh, he had encountered the same superstition which Sir Francis' young husband had found on his military expedition to Lhasa. The Ladakhi people told him that their country had been annexed to Kashmir after the Maharaja had sent General Zorova Singh to invade Tibet in 1848. They asserted that the leader of the Kashmiri troops possessed supernatural powers so that no ordinary leaden bullet could penetrate his body. His forces crossed western Tibet to a point not far from Lake Manasrovar. The Chinese Emperor sent a large army to help the Tibetans, and it victoriously defeated the Kashmiris by sheer weight of numbers. But the only way that they could kill Zoravas Singh was to shoot him with a golden bullet instead of a lead one. He was afterwards hacked into pieces. Possibly due to his commanding presence and his absolute sincerity and spirituality, the Tibetans regard Pranavananda with much respect. They now believe him to be the best Hindu yogis to have visited their country, and so have accorded him this privilege of living there. He will be, within a month or two, the only Indian yogi living in a Tibetan Buddhist monastery, except for his friend Rahula, Rahula, who resides at intervals in Lhasa. Rahula, however, is a Buddhist monk born in the Indian province of Bihar, Bihar, and educated in the temple schools of Ceylon. He is not a Hindu yogi. I met the monk Rahula some years later, and I thought it curious that he should have a Tibetan cast of countenance, although wholly Indian in ancestry. When dressed and muffled up, he looks indistinguishable from a lama. He shows me a largely costly and rare collection of ancient silk paintings, oblong in shape, which had been taken down from the monastery walls and presented to him by various head lamas. The Tibetans like and trust him, and he has the privilege of residing in Lhasa's chief monastery whenever he wishes. He brought back in triumph from one of his journeys another gift consisting of a huge library of rare palm leaf Buddhist Sanskrit volumes, which had totally disappeared from India for 1,000 years through destruction by anti-Buddhist invaders or fanatical Brahmins. From these Tibetan translations, he intended to prepare copies of the missing Sanskrit originals. He needed no fewer than 20 pack mules to carry his gifts back to India. Buddhism has almost disappeared from the land of its birth, and Rahula hoped to save the low flame from total extinction. One afternoon, whilst we sit near the bank of the valley stream, Yogi Pranavananda begins to talk of his teacher, the Swami Janananda. Quote, "My master belongs to a wealthy family living in Andhra, Andhra, the northeast part of the Madras Presidency. At about the age of 17, he had a dream in which a great soul appeared to him and asked him to leave his home, but this request aroused a struggle in his soul, and he did not obey immediately. Again, the great soul came to him in his second dream, repeating his request. But this time the inner conflict was sharper than ever between his desire to obey the great soul and his devotion to his wife. Again he hesitated, lacking the courage to break all family ties. However, the great soul came to him yet again, touched him in a dream, and this time gave him the strength to obey. Thus he left his home and, renouncing the world, disappeared in search of truth. He traveled to the north and the west in quest of a real teacher. Some years later, when he found his master, the latter simply said, 'The spiritual goal is already in your lap.' He saw how highly advanced was the young man, and so it proved, for soon after my revered master entered the highest state of spiritual trance from which he emerged a new man. However, he wanted to make his realization perfect, steady, and unbroken, and so for that purpose he came to the Tehri state, Tehri, and went to live in solitude at Gangotri in 1923. Whilst there, he had an experience which demonstrated the power of his spiritual achievement. He came face to face with a big tiger, which made no attempt to harm him, but just sat on its hind legs and stared at him for some time, and then disappeared into the jungle nearby. He remained in the neighborhood throughout the entire winter, when no other soul would have dared to stay because of the snow. 7 feet high, it buries the whole place. No food of any sort could be obtained during the winter season, but the Tehri state authorities arranged with the nearest local officials to send food supplies at intervals. But the astonishing thing is that the Swami Janananda insisted on remaining there absolutely naked throughout the period of his stay, except for a very narrow loincloth. Janananda lived in an exposed cave without a door, without a fire, and when he was asked how he could remain naked in such terrible cold, he said, "In front of my cave at Gangotri, I would sit on a slab of stone for meditation and enter into samadhi. I became accustomed to the inclemencies of the weather without any difficulty. One day I was urged to throw away all my clothes, suddenly without any apparent reason. I felt some power urging me from inside. That power and the name of the Lord rendered me quite indifferent to the cold, which I did not feel. Imagine him living alone in that wild, deserted region, surrounded by snow and ice, alone, with great avalanches sweeping down from the high peaks from time to time, and liable to fall upon him. His only company was the silent Himalayas themselves, and such wild animals as chanced to pass that way, and a few simple hill folk. Today, if you ask the hillman who used to bring him food about the Swami, you will discover how he grew to love this great soul, for his eyes light up as he speaks, and his heart melts with joy. Suddenly, Pranavananda stops talking, his eyes half closed. He breathes agitatedly and stertorously. I think he's going to have a fit. But no, soon he quietens down and passes by gentle stages into a trance. His body remains serene and unmoving, save for the slight rise and fall of his shoulders as he breathes silently. And then I become aware of a vital change in the atmosphere, that mysterious stillness which heralds the coming of a higher state of consciousness, or of a higher being invades the air. I realize at once that something important has happened, and so I swing half round to face the yogi directly. As I sit upon the ground, interlock my legs in meditation posture, and attempt to adjust myself mentally to whatever is to come. Across the inner eye, the mind's eye, the clairvoyant pineal gland, the name means nothing to me. There flashes the face of a bespectacled, bearded, and broad-nosed man. An amiable smile plays around his lips, a pregnant glance at me. Excuse me. And immediately after a message, I understand. It is the Swami Janananda. By the mysterious power possessed by men of his class, he has projected his mind, his soul, his subtle body. Again, the name means nothing to me, to his disciple, and overshadows me. For a moment, the two are spiritually one, their hearts interblent. This process of self-transference may puzzle the world, but it means the same thing in a minor degree as Jesus meant when he said, "I and my Father are one." This is the true significance of discipleship, its inward secret. Not for nothing do the Hindu yogi traditions declare self-surrender to the Master to be an essential qualification. But the foolish have always materialized this and misunderstood it. All that a real master requires of his disciple is the inner identification with himself, not the surrender of material goods. The latter is the hallmark of charlatanry. The former is the short path, which cuts out all the long and laborious disciplines imposed by other paths. For half an hour we both sit in complete silence. The overshadowed disciple and I endeavor to harmonize myself with the loftier vibrations which now pervade the place. The Master talks to me without words and without speech, and I make myself as sensitive, as receptive to his message as I can. The outer world may see nothing but two men sitting still facing one another, the one with eyes almost closed, the other eyes wide open. But I see in quotes, a sublime presence whose visitation temporarily lifts me above my petty personal self. Ultimately, my companion comes slowly back to his normal condition, turns his head, and then touches his eyes with a handkerchief. We continue to sit, although no longer facing each other, both hushed into muteness. When later we rise and walk through the valley, we talk of other matters, but not of this. It is not easy food for conversation, this experience, and we let it dissolve away, unspoken. Back in the bungalow, I ponder over the short life sketch of this teacher, which my friend has given me. I picture him taking his seat at Gangotri for meditation with, perhaps, a deer stone laid upon a bank of ice, snow falling around and half burying him, and piercing cold winds howling over the pass from Tibet. How has he resisted the terrible hardship of life in such a benumbing solitude? How has he endured the whole of a bitter Himalayan winter at the high altitude of Gangotri, 11,000 feet at the temple level, but overlooked by the snow-clad peak, which is 20,000 feet high? How has he lived through it all, nude and fireless, to emerge safe and sound from his self-imposed ordeal? The body obeys certain well-defined natural laws, and any other man attempting to exist stark naked under similar conditions would inevitably perish. Yet Janananda seems to have suspended the operation by these laws at his own sweet will. What is the explanation? I find some hint of it from memory, partly in two ancient Hindu volumes, and partly in the statement of a Tibetan ascetic whom I met at Buddha Gaya years ago. One of the volumes is the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, Pradipika, a Sanskrit textbook for the use of those who are practicing the way of body control. It describes a hard and difficult physical system of self-discipline involving tremendous efforts of will, and then promises those who follow it the power to resist all changes of temperature. The other book is the famous Bhagavad Gita, a manual of both yoga and philosophy, which counsels the practitioner to withdraw his mind so completely into his deeper spiritual center as to be oblivious of bodily feelings. Be beyond the pair of opposites, heat and cold, are its words. From the Tibetan, I learned that among the advanced aesthetics of the Lama kingdom, there are quite a number who specialize in generating, by certain physical exercises and mental practices, an internal heat, a subtle, fiery force, which they call Loma, L-O-M-O. In these exercises, deep breathing is coupled with efforts of the will and imagination. First, a secret invocation is chanted to receive the requisite magical power, and then the power of visualization is drawn upon, and a subjective image of fire is produced. Then the flames are drawn up to the accompaniment of deep breaths from their supposed seat near the sex organ and sent to the head. The theory of these aesthetics is that this imagined fire warms the generative sex fluid, which is then distributed among the arteries and nerves all over the body by other practices. Finally, the ascetic passes into a trance in which he remains for some time, and his mind is fixed on the fire image which he has created. My Tibetan informant claimed that this practice entirely drives off all sensation of cold from the body and enables the man to feel a pleasant warmth pervading it, although he be living in the depth of Tibet's hard, rigorous winter. In fact, he added, some ascetics deliberately sit in freezing water when practicing their exercises. The clock must tick, and the pages of the calendar must be turned. Yogi Prabhavananda wraps his orange robe a little tighter around his body in the long journey that lies ahead of him. His muffled form must cross the 16,000 feet high Lipu Le Pass, Lipu, Lekh, pass over the Himalayas before it becomes snowbound and impassable if he is to enter Tibet's lofty tableland this year. Our delightful travel talks must come to an end. Our silent mutual lapses into the greater silence. No, our silent mutual lapses into the greater silence must cease. I shall not see this self-reliant, fearless face, nor hear his strong, vehement voice again for at least another year, perhaps more. Yet I tell him that I shall feel, while he is living in the delectable spiritual atmosphere which surrounds Mount Kailas and Lake Manasrovar, that the inner link between us will profit me, and that some souvenir of the atmosphere will be sent occasionally along the invisible telegraph lines of that link. He nods his bearded head. Yes, and I shall send you, through a trader, some pebbles of rock gathered on Mount Kailas itself. They will be more than a memento. Tread on them, and you will tread on Kailas ground, and thus defy the government prohibition. Oh, that's wonderful. And that concludes chapter 10. And I hope, as always, that you enjoyed it. And till soon.